Hi, everyone. Thank you for sticking around for the Q&A of Katie Delamajore's Small Town Universe. My name is Dominique O'Neill. I'm a programmer for SF DocFest, and it is my pleasure to introduce Nelson Delamajore. Thank you so much for being here. It's really great that you can make time for us today. Why don't we start a little bit about what your role was with the film?
Sure. Thanks for having me. It started with the inception and with the idea, Katie and I sitting around talking about how much we hated technology and cell phones because we were, just newly having kids and felt like we were tied to our devices all the time. And that kind of led us down a rabbit hole of discovering the wonderful place of Green Bank, West Virginia, and then just meeting all these people over the years of taking trips down there with our crew and cameras.
Great. Had you been down there before, or you only learned about it through this?
I mean,
Yeah.
the only reason we went there was because we wanted to make something about this place. No, so we hadn't been there prior. And it started with just some exploratory trips with no cameras. I mean, that's kind of how we work anyway. We takes us a long time to bring cameras around when we are circling a story idea. We usually just want to get to know people for a long time first. And so, yeah, it just started with trips going down there. I mean, recording audio, but not no cameras and just meeting people. And then, it took us, we worked on the stories you see in the film take place over the course of 8 years, but we make it all together, make it seem like one story. But that's how long it kind of took us to not only find characters but for stories to pan out, and then for other things to happen in order that we had kind of set up. So that was the as far as the length of production, and the type of story we were telling was part of the length was part of the story. Seeing Ellie grow and seeing George pass and things like that. It took time, which is not common in documentaries these days, especially the ones like ours.
Yeah. Why don't you tell us a little bit about logistically what it was like to film there, if you came across any challenges, not being able to use
Oh
Wi-Fi?
yeah, I mean, yeah, I mean it's a logistical nightmare. People ask me that all the time, and it's like my advice is like, don't go there to film because it's not easy. And the modern gear has wireless mics and things, and you'll notice here and there you'll see them, and we could use them at times, but we were outside the radius of the observatory where it was okay. That or there's different periods of the year where the observatory goes down for maintenance, or times of the day where it's down, and we were in communication, so we knew when that was happening during our trips there. So during those times we were free to use it if we let them know it was us, and then if it showed up in the data they knew it was us. And so we worked around but it's hard. I mean, it's not easy to do. Most of the time we're filming with a boom mic, not only because of the telescope, but then the electrosensitive community. That was the only way we could film with audio with them. And we couldn't use, well, I mean, we couldn't use wireless mics anyway, really, but that's certainly not there. And like even in New York, we didn't with Sue, and that's probably the biggest. I mean, as far as coordinating with your crew, there's not very many places to stay, so you were all staying in the same little campus area they have at the observatory for people that are visiting to do science to sleep at. It's kind of like some dorm rooms, like, so we could communicate in person about what we were doing the next day, because that's about it. And then there's no food to order, so you don't really need a phone for that. You do need to sometimes get in touch with people, and everybody there uses phone numbers that are just 4 digits because there's so few people. It's kind of like a time warp. They're like, oh, so and so's at number 4563, and so sometimes you'd have to use your landline in your room and call the person to follow up. And if they weren't there, you'd have to go look for them, like old school. Oh, I saw them at the such and such a place, so then you go looking for them. And I mean, it's a very much the way things kind of used to be. Maybe the way, certainly I grew up, I'm almost 50. It's like there's a time before these things, you know, and
Mhm.
it's back. It feels like you're back there, and it feels familiar in that way, where you're just relying on yourself and communication, and your phone means nothing, which was kind of nice, actually, a reminder of that.
Yeah. There's some really lovely animated bits throughout the film, like really quick, vibrant, beautiful scenes. Can you talk a little bit about that addition in the film?
Yeah, that's Lottie is incredible. She did a great job. And we didn't really give her that much direction other than like, here are some ideas of like what we're trying to convey, and some rough ideas of how we wanted things to, what we wanted to be in there, and making sure it was scientifically correct. um, but other than that, we let her just kind of do her own thing. And she was someone that Katie had discovered some animation in another film that she was looking at, and came across some of her work, and we just really hit it off with her on the phone. And she lives in the UK, so
Mm.
that actually kind of helped us also in a lot of ways, because it was like we could tell her things, she could work on them. When we were working on these opposite schedules, it was kind of actually perfect, because it's like um, it just made things a little bit easier for us, because it gave her time to do her work, and then by the time we were ready for it, it was ready for us. And so as far as like what I get out of the innovation, one of the qualities I really like about it is that it feels tactile. There's like it almost feels like you can touch it and feel it. And the and it kind of reminds me of, I don't mean to offend her, I hope this wouldn't offend her, but it reminds me of this book that I read to my kids, and lots of kids have read. It was like The Hungry Caterpillar, and it has this
Mhm.
kind of similar quality to like how it, like the construction of the shapes and things reminds me of that book for some reason, and that was a thing I loved about it. So yeah, we couldn't be happier that how that turned out. And I hope it is conveying everything that we wanted to. It's just like fun when it pops up on the screen when it's time to watch animation. I just always find myself enjoying it, and I'm glad to hear that. That was something you enjoyed as well.
Yeah. Yeah, it was beautiful. And then I also want to ask about some of the other contextualizing footage, like the archival footage, like Carl
Mm-hmm.
Sagan's Cosmos and the NARO footage. And so I'm wondering about weaving that in, and because you also are a producer, but also did the editing.
Yeah, it's funny
Correct.
because like we used very little of that in like free for like a couple of years in our cuts of things. Like we just never really tapped into any of that. And it was something that I started playing with in the edit and trying to accentuate parts of the film. And it just started making so much more sense. And it was like a real kind of like, it's kind of like one of the last things that kind of was added into the film. And I mean, you can find a lot of that stuff, and we were given a lot of that stuff by the NRAO. We had asked, like the organization, if they had any of that old films of stuff, and they gave us all of that footage to use. And I mean, there's so much that I didn't use. It's just so great. I just like so much fun to watch all those old films with the narrator, and um, it some of it isn't even really like relevant anymore in a lot of ways, because technology is advanced. The questions they were posing
Mm.
have been answered in some ways. um, what certain things were, and so I mean, there was reasons not to use a lot of it, but it's still really just fun and nostalgic. Um, and yeah, I mean, again, it was like one of the last things we put in. But when we started um, connecting, Ellie brings up Carl Sagan a lot, and then it was like, well, this makes sense, kind of like to have him be. He was a great science communicator, so it kind of made sense to incorporate the things that she was talking about to like actually see them. Um, and even Frank Drake, I mean, there's still like, to me, like I wish we would have done a better job explaining some more stuff about Frank Drake and how important he was to the place. But it was already a very hard film to construct with all the things we were trying to do. But he's also like a really, you know, great and important person that made that place his home. And I'm just happy that we were able to get all that stuff, and have the Carl Sagan estate let us use the footage and believe in the film. So
Yeah. Yeah, can you talk maybe a little bit more about that, about how the information is shared in the film? Because it is very data heavy, but at the same time very digestible. And I'm wondering if you can talk about how you approach that in the filmmaking process.
I mean, that was the hardest hurdle of the film, to wait, and certainly in the post-production is in making it. I mean, Katie kind of took in which she does in general, like a wider net. I mean, there are more people that we filmed with than that ended up in the film. It's just, we cast a really wide net, and then we look at it all later and kind of figure out where the story is. So, when it came to disseminating the information, like we had so many visions of what this film was going to be than what it ultimately became. And that obstacle of like, what if somebody doesn't know what radio astronomy is? What if somebody does? And like not having people be bored or have people be talked down to, and find ways to like let the story drive when the information comes out, and at the right time. Because there was other cuts where things didn't get pushed down or revealed until much later, which didn't make sense. It's like people have to understand, even if they already know what radio astronomy is, let's make something entertaining that it gives a refresher, makes it simple for people to understand, because we felt like that was the concept that needed to, kind of start. Even though I think the first thing is quiet zone, actually, like understanding that this place doesn't have, again, it's like I'm even confused sometimes because we've had things in so many different orders. It's like I forget what the final order is that we settled on in a lot of ways. Because honestly, we changed it so many times and tried so many different iterations of like an open and like the first 20 minutes of your film, which is always the hardest part to figure out. It's like we knew once we got past that first 20 minutes of like how do we figure out this, that the film kind of, the rest of it we had figured out. It was really that, those key pieces of like, when do you tell people about the quiet zone and no cell phones? There's a lot of topics, and in the end it's like these very personal stories. Like these are just kind of like the scene setting things that get you into the stories that so yeah, it was incredibly difficult because it wasn't there wasn't a very like we made another film called Brooklyn Castle, and that had a very easy arc. It was like, okay, here's 1 year inside of a school trying to win chess titles. For that made sense. It was a school year. It had this framework that made this. Didn't have that at all. It was very, like I said before, it took us a long time for these stories to evolve and pan out and to meet new people, and stories that were kind of made sense all together. And so it was ultimately a test of patience. But then it was, once we were like, okay, we have enough, like how do we make it make sense? Because for a long time it didn't. And so I'm also glad to hear that it like that you were, that's something you were that you said was easily digestible. I mean, that's like the greatest compliment for me, because it's like that's what my fear is the whole time when you're cutting, is like it makes sense to me, does it make sense to you?
Right.
So
Right. Well, yeah, I think it is very lovely how information is revealed and how the personal stories are woven throughout. And one thing I do want to ask is uh, still relating to the science behind it is, did you work with advisors? It seems like you had a really close relationship with the observatory. Did you have people coming in to view the film from uh, a science perspective, like a
yeah, I mean, that's more of a, I mean, Katie could get into more
Mhm.
specifics of like how that went down, but in general, yeah, I mean, the advisors watched the film and signed up and said, nobody, they were there to be like, are you, a couple of reasons, like, A, we believe in the, in radio astronomy, or they have a strong connection to that community already there, to tell us if any of our science is wrong in the film, and point out any other inaccuracies that we might have created through editing.
Mhm.
when you think you're trying to clarify something, sometimes you make things wrong and you don't even
Mhm.
realize, so make double checking that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
I mean, we also have had Ellie to talk to all the time, and so she would often be that person for us as well. Like in a quick pinch, like, hey, does this make sense? Kind of thing. And um, yeah, and like also to lend their supporting, because we're trying to build something with some grassroots screenings and taking this to rural communities and to um, ultimately maybe even more observatories that have screening rooms with theaters, like planetarium type places.
Mhm.
And these would be great people to be moderators or to answer people's questions about in these like other locations, if we can build you know groups of people in the science community that are into this stuff. So I mean, they provide lots of resources beyond just the thing you see on the screen. It's like
Mhm.
they're helping us in other ways, on the film.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. Can I ask, so at the end of the film, we see that the NSF funding maybe will, like, the observatory is gonna, it, at least that's something about the observatory existing for another 5 years, I think. But then there's still a question mark after that. So I'm just curious what that looks like at this point, if you can shed any information, light on
Yeah, I
that.
mean, like all governmental things, like there's a review whether, there's funding. Like it's just a natural process of this thing being owned by the government and originally
Mhm.
completely funded by the government. Um, and so, I mean, as far as, because Karen was at one of our screenings and she said that, it, things are good, but it will, they'll have this process will just happen again, and then it'll just be, them defending why it's important. So I mean, I just it just seems to be a never-ending cycle. They were just, happy to get past this hurdle once again, um, and that they also had extra things going on. Like now, what's going to happen in 5 years? I don't know. As far as how they fill the gaps, they were able to fill the gaps with Breakthrough and
Mhm.
various other projects. Now, when that money dries up, you know, I can't speak to that. That's
Mhm.
the telescope would have to provide a little bit more information, but it is still chugging along and thriving. And hopefully, people watching our film will get more interested in the
Mhm.
subject and
Yeah.
maybe even go visit, because it is an awesome place to visit. Um, it's really pretty there, and it's the drive there is incredible. Driving through the mountains, I love spending time there. And there is like places to go around there. Like if when in the winter there is a ski resort
Mhm.
and stuff. So I don't know. It's just an interesting place, and I hope that our film just does anything it can to keep it going, or at least maybe introduce it to people and they make it someplace they want to go.
Yeah, absolutely. You talk a lot about your relationships with everybody down there and how you built that over the course of filmmaking. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about how you found all of these people for the film.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Katie did the initial exploration. We had two young kids at the time, like under one. One was one, and one was pretty newborn. And when Katie went on the first trip, and she went with my friend, they drove together, and she just kind of like drove around, like introducing herself to people, and told her talking to people at the telescope about what she found interesting about the place. And then everybody just kind of pointed her in different directions. And um, you know we had heard about the electrosensitive community in different articles that we had read about the place when we were in like researching it, and so that was intriguing to us. And we were she was able to get someone to give a number, and she was able to introduce herself. But it all took like going there and like meeting the people and staying for long periods of time. Um, and so then that was the first of many trips of her doing that. And then maybe after like a year or two, we started bringing cameras and more gear.
Mhm.
Like once she kind of had made good enough friends, like I didn't make my first trip down there till we were well into, like, she had shot a couple times, I feel like,
Mhm.
at that point. Maybe just one or two other times. And yeah, and then the more time you spend down there, the more people you meet, and that was kind of where, like, Ellie was a later addition. We had
Mm.
been following George and Barb um, and like some people at the telescope and like the boys, Karen's boys, but we really hadn't met Ellie yet. That was like 3 or 4 years into it, and so um, then it was like, then we start to pivot, oh, look, now, look, this is a really interesting story. And so we just kind of,
Mhm.
um, that's, basically how everybody came to be. And then someone introduces you to someone else, and it's not that many people. So,
Right.
talking about an area where that has a maybe, uh, well, like in Green Bank itself is only maybe 300 or 400 people, but in the whole county, it's like a few thousand, so it's not like very many
Mhm.
people.
Yeah. Can you talk also about your relationship with the observatory and the access that you were
Mhm.
allowed?
Yeah, I mean, they were very open about letting us, as long as we didn't break any of the rules of contaminating the data.
Hmm.
We were welcome to. They were. I mean, COVID changed everything. Like there was, we wanted to get in and film more actual observing, and that was the only thing that was a challenge, because it's like these projects are funded by other people, and sometimes like it's being controlled remotely, and it's like there's a lot of permissions that get involved. So there was like, we didn't get a lot of opportunities to get in and do that, which we were meant to, but then COVID
Hmm.
happened, and then it was kind of not possible after a certain time. So we had to kind of like use what we had. But that was like, um, but coordinating with them. I mean, we have shots of the telescope in positions that it it makes more sense to, if but like when the telescope is in a like this position with the arm up, it's in a mode where it's just off. So that's often where you'll see the picture of the telescope is always like with it pointing in this one direction, because that's where they can get up. That's when the ladders align, so they can climb up it and
Mm.
go do what they have to do. And so getting the shots of the telescope like in another position is, or like in these other ones pointing in other directions, becomes a little harder, because if you have digital equipment too close to it, you're disrupting the data. And we got the ability to, which is really rare, like sit out there, and it was during a maintenance period, and we were able to kind of like go, okay, now point it to this way, and like they would, like someone in with a walkie-talkie, we were able to ask them to move it where we wanted, and then we were able to shoot time lapses of it and do all this cool stuff and fly drones, and like that was like all during a maintenance period,
Hmm.
where you see it in this other configuration, which no one else would know that, but we know, like, oh, that's cool, like you don't ever get to film it like this, so um that things like that were all because the telescope allowed us to do it.
Hmm.
You just can't walk up and film it that way.
Yeah.
uh,
Did, did you ever consider shooting on real film with it? Because that wouldn't have the same interference,
right, I
right?
mean, then we wouldn't have then we could have done whatever we wanted, because then it
Hmm.
wouldn't, I mean, that was never really consideration because of costs. I mean, we were making this movie off grant money and stuff, and it
Hmm.
just also like, I mean, you'll notice in the credits we had a lot of cinematographers,
Hmm.
because we could never really have like one crew the same every time. I mean, so we had, whatever friend or local we could get, was what we got. And if we had filmed that, which just would have made things so much harder, because then it would have,
Sure.
we would have needed the same person all the time, which we never knew when we were next going to go. We'd kind of make plans, but it was, it wasn't as easy. Sometimes Katie would, like when George was passing away, like Katie just had to go. Like there was no time to put together, and she just grabbed whatever camera we could get at the time and went. Which is
Hmm.
why it's a little grainy, but it was an intimate moment. He wanted us to be there. He insisted that we be there, so we did whatever we could to be there. So
Yeah, that was a really moving moment in the film. But I'm glad that she was able to be there for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard for me, as you know, I'm watching it so many times, and it was really powerful the first time you watch it, so that's how I have to remember it's going to impact other people.
Mhm.
um but then I questioned whether we went on too long with leaving it up there. I don't know what you thought, if you thought that it was that we might have like lingered on it too long, but it just was like, there was like a humanity to waiting that long to me, or like
Mhm.
like seeing him, you know, touch her head, and try to make her feel better was, to me worth waiting
Yeah.
that long. But I could see how it could be hard to watch, you know.
Mhm.
I was curious what if you thought it went on too long or not.
Yeah, I feel like as a filmmaker, you must always have, I mean, like the question of like when is the film done must just plague you of, is this edited the right way? Was the shot too much? But I think the film is really, really beautiful, and I want to thank you for sharing it with us. I really love at the end, Ellie says, she shares this quote about, as Earthlings, we're connected to the universe and to each other. And I think the film just does a really beautiful job of expressing that sentiment. And yeah, so thank you so much for sharing it with us and for being here today. And
Thank you for having us.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that summary. I mean, that's you know we were what we were going for. So I appreciate you inviting us to be part of the festival, and thanks for all who stayed for this.